Our world was first woven together not by politicians, but by merchants, the ancient traders who braved unknown oceans and deserts created the original blueprint for globalization. By the end of this story, you will understand how a handful of brave travelers built the economic and cultural foundations of our modern world. We will uncover why a single blue stone from Afghanistan ended up in an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb, and how myths of sea monsters hid crucial navigational secrets. What do you believe is the most powerful force that connects different cultures? The smallest surplus could change a community forever. One family might have more grain than they could eat, while another crafted exceptionally strong baskets. This simple reality, the existence of a little extra, ignited the most fundamental human interaction beyond the family, the trade. It started with direct barter between neighbors, a handcrafted tool for a portion of dried meat. But the human imagination for what was possible did not stop at the village boundary. The true leap happened when someone looked toward the distant hills and wondered what lay beyond them. Scarcity in one valley and abundance in the next created an irresistible pull, a primal economic incentive to move. This was not about mere survival anymore. It was about acquiring something better, something different, something that told a story simply by existing. The evidence for this ancient wanderlust is etched into the very ground we walk on. At the ancient settlement of Catalhoyuk in what is now Turkey, archaeologists have uncovered treasures that whisper of vast, unexpected connections. Shiny black obsidian glass, perfect for crafting razor-sharp tools, was found there, but its nearest source was a volcanic mountain range hundreds of miles away. Even more telling are delicate seashells carried all the way from the Mediterranean coast to a landlocked city. These were not necessities, they were desires made tangible. That piece of volcanic glass was not just a tool, it was a piece of a distant, powerful mountain. That shell was not just an ornament, it was a physical piece of the great unknown sea. This nascent network of exchange, stretching across daunting distances, was the humble, almost invisible root system of a tree that would one day encircle the entire planet. It proves that the drive to connect, to reach beyond our immediate horizon for what another has to offer, is woven into the very fabric of human civilization. These early exchanges were far more than simple transactions. They were the seeds of legend. The merchant, the person daring enough to carry goods across those vast, empty spaces, began to occupy a unique place in the human imagination. In the world of myth, they were never mere business people. They were cunning heroes, divinely favored travelers, and adventurers whose journeys were blessed by the gods themselves. Consider the Phoenicians, the master mariners of the ancient Mediterranean. Their most important deity was Melkart, a king and a god specifically associated with colonization and the protection of sea voyagers. To pray to Melkart was to seek safe passage through monster-infested waters and into prosperous, unknown harbors. His divine favor transformed a dangerous commercial voyage into a sacred quest. Every culture that thrived on trade wove similar tales. These stories did much more than just entertain. They were a sophisticated cultural technology, a way to package and preserve essential, life-saving knowledge. A myth about a many-headed sea serpent lurking near a particular coastline was not just a fantastical monster. It was a vital warning about treacherous, jagged rocks hidden just beneath the waves. Tales of lands where gold grew on trees or rivers flowed with honey were exaggerated, yes, but they pointed early explorers toward regions rich in specific, valuable resources. The story itself became a map passed from an experienced captain to his wide-eyed crew, encoding generations of hard-won navigational wisdom and cultural intelligence. This mythological framework served a profound psychological purpose. It provided a spiritual justification for leaving the safety of home. To venture into the absolute unknown was terrifying. It defied every natural instinct. But if the journey was a divinely sanctioned epic, if the merchant was playing a role in a story written by the gods, then the immense risks could be framed as a noble endeavor. The merchant was no longer just a person seeking profit. They were a central figure in the expansion of human consciousness, a hero expanding the very boundaries of the known world. Their success was a testament to their cleverness and their favor with the divine, making their return not just a commercial victory, but the triumphant conclusion of an epic tale. This mythological framework for the merchant hero found its ultimate expression in the world's first great civilizations. In the Fertile Crescent, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the city-states of Mesopotamia were perfecting the architecture of global trade. Places like were not merely bustling cities, they were the first corporate headquarters, establishing formal routes that transformed sporadic barter into a predictable, organized system. To manage this complex new economy, Mesopotamian merchants invented the essential tools of commerce we still rely on today. They created standardized weights and measures, ensuring that a shekel of grain in one city was identical to a shekel of grain in another, building the very foundation of trust across vast distances. Their most revolutionary innovation, however, was recorded in the delicate wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform script on clay tablets. These were the world's first binding contracts, detailing transactions, loans, and partnerships, turning a simple promise into a permanent, enforceable record. The scale of their ambition is breathtakingly illustrated by the goods they pursued. Deep blue lapis lazuli was mined from the remote mountains of Afghanistan, transported over thousands of miles of rugged terrain to adorn the tombs of Mesopotamian royalty. Mighty cedar wood was felled in the forests of Lebanon and floated down the rivers to build their grand palaces and temples. This was not casual exchange, it was a deliberate, sustained economic network. These city-states became dependent on resources they could not find within their own borders, creating the first international supply chains. What the Mesopotamian blueprint proved was revolutionary. Sustained wealth and power could be built not only through the violent chaos of conquest, but through the more delicate, sophisticated arts of negotiation, logistics, and mutual benefit. They discovered that interdependence could be a source of strength, forging bonds across continents that were as powerful as any empire. That deep blue stone from the Afghan mountains became a thread stitching ancient empires together. Its journey is a masterpiece of prehistoric logistics, a chain of human connection that spanned continents. Lapis lazuli existed in only one place on Earth, a remote and rugged region of Afghanistan known as Badakhshan. To reach the royal workshops of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, this stone had to travel over 1,500 miles. It was a journey of immense difficulty, passing through the hands of countless cultures. It began with miners who knew the secrets of the mountains, extracting the rock with immense effort. From there, it was passed to local traders who transported it through the high mountain passes. These caravans then handed it off to middlemen in the great cities of the Indus Valley, who would ship it across the Arabian Sea. Finally, it would travel up the Nile or overland to its final, glittering destination. At every stage of this epic trek, the stone's value increased. The cost was not just in gold or silver, but in the sheer human endeavor required to move it. This was not a journey one person or even one kingdom could manage alone. It demanded a fragile yet resilient web of mutual understanding, different cultures, speaking unrelated languages and worshipping different gods, had to agree on basic rules of exchange. They needed shared notions of value, of measurement, of fair dealing. The silent, beautiful blue stone was a catalyst, forcing cooperation on a scale never before attempted. Its value was entirely symbolic. A pharaoh was buried with Lapis Lazuli because its color mirrored the heavens, a piece of the night sky to carry into the afterlife. In Mesopotamia, it was carved into seals and amulets for royalty and the gods. This was not a commodity of survival, but of spirit. It proved that the most powerful human motivations are often not need, but want. The desire for beauty, for status, for a connection to the divine could move mountains, or at the very least, could move a precious piece of a mountain across the known world. While the blue stone traveled by land, another civilization was mastering the highways of the sea. The Phoenicians did not just sail the Mediterranean, they engineered it into the world's first truly international commercial network. Their ships, built from the famed cedars of Lebanon, were revolutionary for their time. With a deep hull for cargo and a single broad sail, these vessels were not designed for raiding or war, but for endurance and capacity. They were the freighters of the ancient world, built to carry heavy loads of olive oil, wine, and the legendary Tyrian purple dye across vast, open water. This mastery of the sea required a parallel mastery of the sky. To navigate the featureless deep, Phoenician sailors learned to trust a fixed point of light in the northern heavens, the star we call Polaris. By night, this constant celestial guide allowed them to venture far beyond the comforting sight of land, turning the terrifying open ocean into a predictable route. Their voyages were not random explorations, but deliberate expansions of economic influence. They established a string of colonies, from the mighty city of Carthage in North Africa to the distant port of Cadiz at the edge of Spain, creating a network of safe harbors and trading posts that stretched for thousands of miles. But their most enduring export was not a good, but an idea. The Phoenicians are credited with spreading a simplified alphabet, a set of just 22 characters that could represent every sound in their language. This was a tool born from the necessities of commerce, a way to standardize contracts, record inventories, and communicate across different cultures without the need for a scribe to memorize thousands of complex pictograms. Imagine the power of this innovation. A merchant in Cyprus could now write a bill of lading that a business partner in Sicily could understand. This shared system of writing dissolved linguistic barriers, creating a common ground for complex transactions and fostering a shared intellectual space across the entire Mediterranean basin. The Phoenician legacy demonstrates that the most powerful cargo a merchant ship can carry is not silk or spice, but knowledge itself. They disseminated the very foundations of culture, proving that trade routes are also the pathways along which ideas travel, forever changing the minds they touch. The secret of silk was guarded more fiercely than any imperial treasure. For centuries, China held a monopoly on the production of this miraculous fabric, a secret woven from the life cycle of a simple silkworm. The process of sericulture was a state secret of the highest order, and revealing it to an outsider was an offense punishable by death. This deliberate, powerful secrecy transformed silk from a mere commodity into an object of pure myth in the West. In the bustling forums of Rome, this fabric was a sensation. It was dazzlingly beautiful, impossibly light, and sensuous to the touch. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder struggled to comprehend its origin, spinning tales that the Chinese harvested it from the leaves of a special tree. They called the distant, mysterious source of this wonder Seers, a land that existed more in legend than on any accurate map. To wear silk in Rome was to display unimaginable wealth and a direct connection to the edges of the known world. It became more than a status symbol, it was a wearable piece of mythology. The Roman Senate even issued edicts trying to ban the wearing of silk, decrying it as a morally corrupting luxury that drained the empire's treasury of gold. But the demand was unstoppable. This deep, persistent desire for a single, exquisite material is what finally crystallized a loose network of trails into a permanent, formal corridor of exchange. The pathways across the brutal deserts and towering mountains of Central Asia, long used by nomadic tribes, were now defined by a single purpose: to connect the two greatest empires on Earth. This was the birth of the Silk Road, not as a single road but as a sprawling web of routes, all energized by the allure of Chinese silk. But the caravans did not just carry silk. They carried the world with them. In the saddlebags of merchants and the minds of pilgrims traveling these same routes came Buddhism, moving from India into East Asia. New technologies like papermaking would travel west, forever altering the course of human communication. Religions, artistic styles, and even devastating illnesses would flow along this corridor. The myth of silk had created a physical reality, a transcontinental artery that pulsed with the lifeblood of ideas, proving that a culture's most powerful export can sometimes be the stories it inspires. A slow river of camels and merchants could take weeks to pass a single point on the horizon. These caravans were not just lines of travelers, they were mobile cities winding their way across the deserts of Arabia and the steppes of Asia. Every element of their journey was a masterpiece of logistics, a carefully choreographed dance with a hostile environment. The most brilliant innovation supporting this system was the Caravanserai. Spaced a day's journey apart along the trade routes, these were not simple inns but fortified islands of civilization. Behind their strong walls, merchants found safety from bandits, water for their animals, a place to rest, and a bustling marketplace to conduct business. A trader from Venice could find himself sharing a meal with a merchant from Samarkand, their goods laid out side by side. The Caravanserai was a neutral ground, a diplomatic and commercial hub where the only law was the universal language of trade. Within these walls, the exchange was far richer than silk and spice. News from 1,000 miles away was a valuable commodity. A new song, a forgotten myth, or a revolutionary idea about mathematics could travel as fast as the camels could walk. A more efficient saddle design invented in one region would be adopted by the entire caravan by the next season. This was the terrestrial internet of the ancient world, a physical network transmitting data in the form of stories, innovations, and cultural practices. Such a system could not function on force. It relied entirely on a fragile web of cooperation and trust. Different cultures with no common government or language had to develop shared codes of conduct. They learned to rely on one another for survival in the brutal desert, understanding that their mutual success depended on their ability to work together. This daily practice of negotiation and interdependence on a personal level was the social groundwork for international relations, proving that trust could be built, one shared waterskin and one honest transaction at a time. A single peppercorn was worth more than a peasant's daily wage in medieval Europe. This was not merely about flavor, it was about a deep, almost magical belief in the power of these aromatic treasures. Spices like black pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were not seen as simple ingredients. They were potent substances woven into the fabric of myth and medicine. People truly believed that cinnamon could ward off illness and that cloves had the power to preserve the body itself. They were essential components in sacred rituals and ancient remedies, making their value spiritual as much as it was sensual. The source of these wonders, a scattered chain of islands in Southeast Asia known as the Moluccas or the Spice Islands, was a secret so valuable it was guarded by nature itself with treacherous seas and unpredictable winds. The astronomical markup on a sack of peppercorns, sometimes exceeding 1,000% from its origin to a European market, created a financial gravity so powerful it pulled the map of the world apart. This potential for unimaginable wealth directly funded a revolution in technology. New, stronger ships like the Portuguese caravel were designed not for coastal trade, but to withstand the punishing waves of the open Atlantic. Navigational tools like the astrolabe were refined to chart a course across trackless oceans. The quest for spices did not just encourage exploration, it paid for the very tools that made it possible. Every voyage launched into the unknown was a colossal gamble, a privately funded mission where the investors hoped for a return that could make them kings. This relentless economic ambition became the primary engine for the most dramatic geographical discoveries in human history. When Vasco da Gama's fleet finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope and sailed into the Indian Ocean, they were not sent by a spirit of pure curiosity. They were following a trail of scent and profit laid down over centuries. The resulting encounters between East and West were sometimes cooperative, often fraught with tension, but always transformative. The story of the spice trade is the ultimate proof that the human appetite for flavor and fragrance can redraw the boundaries of the known world, forcing continents into a conversation that would forever alter their collective destiny. A merchant from Egypt and a trader from India faced a profound challenge, one that went far beyond language. How could they possibly agree on the value of their goods? A bag of Egyptian grain meant nothing to the Indian trader, just as his intricately carved spices held no immediate, practical value to the Egyptian. This was the fundamental limitation of barter, a system that worked within a community but collapsed entirely between distant cultures. The solution to this ancient problem emerged from a small kingdom in Anatolia called Lydia. Around 600 years before the Common Era, the Lydians made a conceptual leap that would echo for millennia. They produced the world's first standardized coinage, the Lydian stater. This was not merely a piece of precious metal, it was a promise made physical. Each coin was stamped with a distinctive mark, often a lion, which guaranteed its weight and purity. That stamp, backed by the authority of the Lydian king, was a revolution. It meant a merchant no longer had to haggle over the relative value of a bolt of cloth versus a sack of salt. Both the Egyptian and the Indian could now look at that lion and understand its worth instantly. The coin itself became the object of desire, a universally accepted token that could be saved, transported, and exchanged for anything, anywhere along the trade routes. This innovation created the first true common language of commerce, one that required no translation. Trust was no longer a fragile bond between two individuals who might never meet again. It was transferred to the symbol on the coin. The ruling authority became the trusted third party in every transaction. This financial technology was the final, crucial piece that allowed trade to scale from a local practice into a truly global system. With a purse full of staters, a merchant's potential was limitless. They could travel across continents, confident that the value they carried in their pocket would be recognized and accepted. Money dissolved the oldest barriers to exchange, proving that a shared belief in a symbol could build bridges more effectively than any treaty. A Buddhist monk walking the Silk Road carried no goods to sell. His only cargo was a revolutionary idea, a philosophy of compassion and inner peace born in the forests of India. As he traveled, he shared this philosophy with Chinese scholars and merchants who found profound meaning in its teachings. Slowly, subtly, the ideas merged with local traditions, giving birth to an entirely new form of Buddhism, one that would become deeply embedded in Chinese, Korean, and Japanese culture for millennia. This was not a transaction recorded on any clay tablet. Yet it was one of the most significant exchanges in human history. The caravans did not just transport silk and spices, they were mobile universities, their saddlebags stuffed with intangible cargo that would reshape civilizations. Another profound cultural fusion occurred in the wake of Alexander the Great's conquests. His armies established cities from Egypt to India, and while his empire fractured after his passing, the cultural imprint remained. This was the Hellenistic period, a breathtaking blend of Greek artistic ideals with Eastern traditions. In the ancient city of Gandhara, located in modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, sculptors began creating some of the first ever lifelike images of the Buddha. But they did not use the abstract styles of India. Instead, they portrayed him with the serene, idealized features of a Greek god, his robes falling in soft, classical folds. This artistic innovation made the foreign philosophy more accessible and relatable, helping it spread further and faster. The statue itself was a silent conversation between two worlds, a perfect fusion of form and faith. These exchanges demonstrate that the most durable impact of trade routes was not the material wealth that changed hands, but the invisible freight of ideas that traveled alongside it. A new way of seeing the world, a different approach to the divine, a revolutionary scientific concept. These were the true treasures that escaped the confines of the merchant's chest to seep into the very soul of a culture, altering its destiny forever. A caravan leader carried more than just spices and silk in his saddlebags. He carried the private words of kings. In a world without permanent embassies, the merchant was the original diplomat, a trusted traveler whose credibility was built not on royal blood, but on a reputation for honest dealing. These individuals were uniquely positioned to move between rival powers. A ruler might distrust the official envoy of a neighboring empire, seeing only a potential spy. But a merchant whose family had supplied the royal court with fine cloth for generations was a known quantity. His primary loyalty was to the continuity of trade, which required stability and peace. This made him a perfect neutral channel for delicate communications. History is filled with their unsung diplomatic triumphs. Traders from the Italian city-states, like Venice and Genoa, routinely negotiated complex treaties with the Mamluk sultans of Egypt and the Byzantine emperors, securing not only trading rights but often forging political alliances that shaped the balance of power in the Mediterranean. They arranged the exchange of precious gifts that served as symbols of goodwill, and sometimes even facilitated royal marriages, binding distant dynasties together through bonds of family and commerce. Their value to rulers extended into the realm of intelligence. A merchant returning from a year-long journey to a foreign capital was a living library of information. He could report on the health of a rival king, the morale of their army, the state of their harvests, and the mood of their people. This ground-level intelligence was often more accurate and timely than anything gathered by traditional spies. The trust they cultivated was their most valuable asset. A king knew that a merchant who lied or cheated in a political matter would see his commercial empire collapse, so honesty in diplomacy was a matter of economic survival. This blurred the lines between the marketplace and the throne room, proving that the pathways of commerce have always been the veins through which the lifeblood of international relations flows. The bustling agora of Athens or the festival grounds of Epangerus were far more than mere marketplaces. They were vibrant crossroads where the daily lives of mortals brushed against the eternal realm of the gods. These seasonal fairs, sanctioned by religious observance, transformed simple commerce into a sacred event. People gathered not only to buy and sell, but to participate in athletic contests, witness theatrical performances, and make offerings at grand temples. In the collective imagination, these were places of heightened possibility, where a divine messenger might walk unseen among the crowd or a chance encounter could change a person's destiny. The market stall and the altar stood side by side, reflecting a worldview where material exchange and spiritual devotion were inextricably linked. This mythological framing elevated the entire experience of trade, infusing the act of bartering for a new pot or a length of cloth with a sense of participating in a larger cosmic order. The sheer concentration of people was the true engine of progress. For a few days each year, a remote field or a city's main square would swell into one of the most densely populated and diverse places on Earth. A farmer from a small village could see goods from 3 continents, hear a dozen different languages, and witness technological marvels like a new type of water pump or a revolutionary design for a wagon wheel. News traveled faster at these fairs than by any other means. A political upheaval in a distant land, a new philosophical idea, or a medical remedy discovered in a far-off culture could all be absorbed in a single afternoon. This was the ancient world's information superhighway, a temporary but incredibly efficient hub for the exchange of both goods and ideas. The seasonal fair was a prototype for every global trade hub that followed, from the medieval souks of Baghdad to the modern financial centers of today. It proved that when you bring together a critical mass of people and products in a spirit of shared purpose, you create a microcosm of a connected world, a living preview of globalization where the only true currency was curiosity. The rhythm of global trade was once dictated not by kings but by the wind. For the merchants who dared to cross the Indian Ocean, the discovery of the monsoon patterns was nothing short of a miracle. These were not gentle breezes, they were immense seasonal engines of air that reversed direction with the calendar. For half the year, the winds blew steadily from the southwest, and for the other half, they reversed to blow from the northeast. This predictable shift transformed an unpredictable, terrifying ocean into a scheduled maritime highway. A ship captain from Rome could now load his vessel with gold and wine in Egypt during the summer, confident that the southwest monsoon would carry him directly to the spice ports of India. After wintering there, trading and waiting, the northeast monsoon would then fill his sails and push him and his precious cargo of pepper and gems back home. This was not just sailing, it was a carefully timed dance with the planet itself. The knowledge of this cycle was the most valuable trade secret in the ancient world. It was intellectual property more precious than any single cargo. Port cities like Aden and Muscat rose to immense power and wealth not because of what they produced, but because of what they knew. They were the gatekeepers of this celestial schedule, the hubs where sailors gathered to wait for the wind's signal to depart. This shared, secret understanding of nature created a truly synchronized global economy. Farmers in the Malabar coast of India would harvest their peppercorns knowing that the fleet of Roman ships would arrive with the next monsoon, their holds empty and ready to be filled. This natural calendar linked the agricultural cycles of one continent to the commercial demands of another, creating an interdependence that spanned thousands of miles. For over 1,000 years, this system held, a testament to humanity's ability to listen to the earth and build a world upon its rhythms. A merchant's return was more than just an economic event, it was a performance of the impossible. After years away, he would stand in the town square, unloading wonders alongside his words. He spoke of people who painted their skin with intricate symbols, of rulers who lived in palaces of gold, and of animals that were more myth than flesh, creatures with necks so long they could browse the tops of trees. These stories did not simply describe difference, they actively constructed it. For the listening crowd, the world suddenly split in two. There was us, the familiar, the normal, and there was them, the other. This newly defined otherness was a powerful mirror. By hearing tales of societies that worshipped a dozen gods, a fiercely monotheistic culture could suddenly see its own faith more clearly, its boundaries more sharply defined. Identity, for the first time, became a matter of contrast. It was not just who you were, but who you were not. The merchants' tales could easily tip into fear. Stories of foreign rituals or unfamiliar social structures, stripped of their original context, often fueled suspicion and gave rise to legends of monstrous races living at the edge of the map. Yet this very same fear was twinned with an irresistible curiosity. The human mind, once presented with a mystery, struggles to leave it unsolved. The existence of a different way of life posed a profound, unspoken question. Could their way be better? This intellectual itch demanded to be scratched, motivating kings to send envoys and scholars to study foreign texts. In this way, the merchant was the original ethnographer, a rough and untrained observer whose first-hand accounts became the primary source material for the world's first maps of human culture. He may not have understood all that he saw, but he was the one who saw it and lived to tell the tale. His fragmented reports were the starting point for a much larger project, the lifelong human endeavor to understand our own dazzling diversity. A shipwreck was more than a tragedy, it was a legal crisis waiting to happen. When a vessel carrying goods from 5 different merchants sank in a storm off the coast of Rhodes, a difficult question arose. Who should bear the financial loss? Was it the ship owner, the captain who navigated into the storm, or the merchants whose cargo now lay at the bottom of the sea? In the absence of clear rules, such an event could shatter trading partnerships and deter anyone from future investment. It was from the urgent need to answer these exact questions that the Rhodian sea law emerged around the 8th century of the Common Era. This was not a law imposed by a single empire, but a collective agreement, a common code developed by and for the merchants and sailors of the Mediterranean. It represented a monumental conceptual leap, the understanding that commerce could not flourish on a foundation of chaos. The Rhodians codified the principle of general average, a revolutionary idea of shared risk. If a captain had to jettison some cargo to save the ship and the rest of its freight, the loss was not borne by the owner of the discarded goods alone. Instead, all the merchants who had cargo on that voyage would share the cost proportionally. This transformed a potential ruin into a manageable setback, fostering a spirit of collective security among competitors. The code also established clear rules for maritime loans, which functioned as the world's first form of insurance. A lender would provide capital for a voyage, but the loan would only be repaid if the ship returned safely. If the ship was lost, the debt was forgiven. The high interest rate on such a loan was not mere profit, it was the premium for assuming a colossal risk. This system injected vital capital into trade by making investment possible, even when the outcome was uncertain. These early legal frameworks created something more valuable than any single ruling. They created predictability. A merchant in Alexandria could now enter a contract with a ship captain from Carthage, both confident that a recognized set of rules would govern their transaction and resolve any disputes. This legal safety net dramatically reduced the perceived risk of long-distance trade, encouraging the flow of goods and capital on an unprecedented scale. The silent, unspoken foundation of every transaction was no longer just trust between two people, but trust in the system itself. This was the true birth of international commerce, not as a wild gamble, but as a calculated endeavor built upon a shared commitment to order and fairness. Golden amber, warm as captured sunlight, began its life as tree resin in the cold pine forests bordering the Baltic Sea. For the local tribes who gathered it along the shores, it was a beautiful, mystical substance. They believed it was the tears of the sun god shed for the earth, or the solidified light of the long summer days. Yet its true destiny lay not in the north, but thousands of miles to the south, under the brilliant sun of the Mediterranean. The journey this material would take is a testament to the sheer magnetic pull of human desire. From the Baltic coast, the amber was passed southward, hand to hand, along a pathway that would become known as the Amber Route. It moved through the lands of Germanic tribes who traded it for salt and metals from the Celts. The Celts, master artisans, then carved the amber into intricate beads and pendants, increasing its value before passing it further south into the world of the Etruscans, and finally, to the glittering courts of Mycenaean Greece and the pharaohs of Egypt. No single king or empire governed this entire chain. It was a purely commercial network, held together by the shared understanding that everyone along the line profited from its continuity. A chieftain in the Alps had no political ties to a merchant in Greece, but he understood the value of the golden stone that passed through his lands. He provided safe passage not out of loyalty, but out of self-interest, knowing that to disrupt the flow was to cut off a source of wealth and prestige. This created a remarkable stability. For centuries, through the rise and fall of empires, the Amber Route persisted, a self-regulating economic artery that proved cooperation could be more durable than conquest. In the royal tombs of Mycenae, archaeologists have found beads of this Baltic amber, resting alongside gold masks and bronze weapons. In Egypt, a bracelet of amber was placed in the tomb of Tutankhamun, a piece of the distant, cold north accompanying a sun king into the afterlife. The material itself was transformed by this journey. In the north, it was the tears of a local god. By the time it reached the Mediterranean, it was a symbol of ultimate luxury, a piece of solidified myth that connected the entire known world, from the frozen shores to the desert palaces, in a continuous, silent conversation of commerce. A single street could hold the world within its walls. The bazaar was far more than a collection of shops. It was a living, breathing organism at the very center of the trading city. In the great urban crossroads like Baghdad or Samarkand, these sprawling marketplaces evolved from simple trading posts into intricate social and economic engines. Walking into a bazaar was an assault on the senses, the air thick with the scent of exotic spices, the sound of a dozen languages haggling, and the dazzling sight of silk from China laid beside amber from the Baltic. But beneath this vibrant chaos lay a hidden, highly efficient structure. The labyrinth of alleys was not arranged at random. Each narrow lane was dedicated to a specific craft or commodity. The coppersmiths hammered away in one quarter, the perfumers displayed their fragrant oils in the next, and the textile merchants unfurled their colorful bolts of cloth just beyond. This organization by guild created a powerful system of quality control and collective bargaining, ensuring that a buyer received a fair product and a craftsman received a fair price. It was a self-regulating universe of commerce. The bazaar's true power, however, lay in its role as the city's central nervous system. This was where information flowed as freely as any currency. A money changer seated at his small table was not just converting coins. He was the neighborhood source of news, hearing reports from caravan masters about political stability 1,000 miles away. The first primitive banks emerged here, as wealthy merchants began safeguarding the funds of others and issuing letters of credit that could be honored in another city, eliminating the need to travel with chests of heavy, dangerous gold. Gossip, financial deals, and craft secrets all swirled together in the same crowded aisles. The bazaar was the ultimate melting pot, the place where the local farmer selling his dates met the global merchant offering pearls from the Indian Ocean. It proved that commerce could not exist in a vacuum. It needed a vibrant, structured, and adaptable social heart to thrive. This institution became the template for every marketplace that followed, a testament to humanity's need to gather, to exchange, and to build a community around the simple, profound act of trade. A lone merchant facing a foreign tax collector had little power, but 1,000 merchants speaking with one voice could negotiate with kings. This was the revolutionary logic behind the Merchant Guild, a collective that transformed individual traders into a formidable political and economic force. From the souks of the Middle East to the port cities of Northern Europe, these associations arose from a simple, powerful need for mutual protection. The most famous of these, the Hanseatic League, was not a kingdom with an army, but a confederation of merchant towns from Hamburg to Riga that came to dominate Baltic trade for centuries. Its power did not come from a crown, but from a shared ledger. By banding together, these cities could impose trade embargoes that could cripple the economy of a rival kingdom, forcing rulers to grant them extraordinary privileges like tax exemptions and their own independent trading posts known as contours in foreign lands. Within the guild, a sophisticated system of self-regulation took root. They established strict standards for the quality of goods, ensuring that a bolt of cloth stamped with the guild seal would be of a consistent length and weave, whether it was sold in London or Novgorod. This created a brand identity built on trust, a promise of reliability that spanned languages and borders. For the traveling merchant, the guild acted as a portable safety net. It provided legal aid if a member was unfairly imprisoned abroad, negotiated for the release of captured ships, and even maintained hostels in distant cities where a member could find a familiar face, a hot meal, and credible news. This support system dramatically reduced the personal risk of long-distance trade, encouraging more individuals to embark on these ambitious journeys. The guild also cultivated a powerful professional ethics. A merchant who cheated a business partner or defaulted on a debt would find himself blacklisted, his reputation ruined, and his access to the guild's vast network severed. This enforced culture of creditworthiness was the bedrock upon which complex, long-term financing was built. A merchant's word was his bond because his guild was watching. These collectives were the prototypes of the modern corporation, demonstrating that commercial interests, when organized, could wield influence rivaling that of nations. They proved that the most durable power in a connected world is not always held by the one with the largest army, but by the one who controls the most reliable pathways of exchange. The most valuable cargo on a merchant ship was never listed on any manifest. It was the secret of how things were made. A society could possess all the gold in the world, but without the knowledge to transform raw materials into something useful or powerful, that wealth was meaningless. This is why technological secrets were guarded with the same intensity as royal treasuries. The Chinese dynasties, for instance, held a centuries-long monopoly on two world-changing innovations, paper and gunpowder. They understood that the power to record information cheaply and the power to project force at a distance were advantages too great to share freely. Yet, despite their best efforts, these secrets slowly seeped out along the Silk Road, carried not in chests, but in the minds of travelers or sometimes through deliberate deception. The story of how the West learned the art of papermaking is a classic tale of industrial espionage. In the 8th century, Arab forces encountered Chinese papermakers after a military engagement in Central Asia. Recognizing the immense value of this technology, which was far superior to papyrus or parchment, they spared the artisans' lives on one condition: that they teach their craft. This knowledge traveled to Baghdad, then to the Islamic world, and finally into Europe, revolutionizing administration, science, and literature everywhere it went. The movement was not one way. The astrolabe, a sophisticated astronomical calculator perfected by Arabic scholars, slowly made its way into the hands of European navigators. This instrument, which allowed sailors to determine their latitude by sighting the stars, was a master key that unlocked the world's oceans. It was technological borrowing on a grand scale, where a tool developed for one culture's scholarly and religious practices became the very instrument that enabled another culture's age of exploration and eventual global dominance. This relentless, often unintended, transfer of knowledge created a feedback loop of innovation. One society's breakthrough became a building block for another's leap forward. The pace of development was no longer confined to a single river, valley, or empire. It was now a global race. The shared technological heritage we enjoy today, from the printed book to the maritime charts that first mapped the world, stands as the ultimate legacy of those ancient merchants. They did not just trade objects, they traded the very means of progress itself. The marketplace was not just a hub of goods, but a crucible of ideas where philosophers first wrestled with the very soul of commerce. In ancient Greece, Aristotle looked upon the bustling agora with a deeply skeptical eye. He drew a critical line between what he called oikonomia, the virtuous management of a household to meet its needs, and krematistike, the art of wealth acquisition for its own sake. To him, a merchant profiting merely from the exchange of goods without improving them was an unnatural and potentially corrupting force. This moral unease with pure profit-seeking echoed across the world. In ancient India, the statesman and philosopher Kautilya presented a far more pragmatic view in his Arthashastra, a comprehensive treatise on statecraft. He recognized the merchant's vital role in filling the royal treasury and strengthening the kingdom, but he insisted this power required strict regulation. He advocated for controlled prices and harsh punishments for merchants who colluded to create artificial scarcity, viewing such greed as a direct threat to social stability. The central, burning question for all these thinkers was the concept of a just price. Was the value of an item simply what a buyer was desperate enough to pay, or was there a deeper, inherent worth related to the labor and cost invested? This debate raged in the writings of medieval scholars like Thomas Aquinas, who argued that trade itself was not sinful, but became so when it involved deception or exploited another's hardship. The lending of money at interest, known as usury, was a particularly intense flashpoint, condemned by many religious traditions as profiting from another's misfortune. Yet within these fierce debates lay the seeds of economic legitimacy. By questioning the ethics of trade, these philosophers were, ironically, giving it a defined place in the moral universe. They were establishing that commerce was not a mindless activity, but a social force that carried weight and required conscious ethical choices. This intellectual struggle to justify profit was the necessary precursor to everything that followed. It provided a framework, however contested, that eventually allowed merchants to step out of the shadows of moral suspicion and into their role as legitimate architects of a connected world, their pursuit of gain slowly being understood not just as personal ambition, but as a driver of communal prosperity and global discovery. A handful of goods achieved a power that transcended empires, becoming the first truly global currencies of desire. Silk, spices, precious metals, and incense shared a remarkable quality. Their value was not rooted in mere survival, but in the human spirit. They answered a deeper hunger for beauty, for purity, for connection to the divine. Silk was more than a fabric, it was liquid wealth, a shimmering symbol of status that whispered of a mysterious, advanced civilization far to the east. Spices like cinnamon and frankincense were not just for flavor, they were central to sacred rituals, their smoke carrying prayers to the heavens, and their scents used to purify spaces and bodies. Gold and silver were universally understood as the substance of the gods, the only fitting material for royal crowns and holy relics. This shared, almost spiritual valuation created the world's first common language of worth. A merchant did not need to explain why incense was valuable in Egypt. It was just as essential for temple ceremonies there as it was in Babylon. This universal appeal forged a true global market, perhaps the first in human history. A poor harvest of frankincense trees in the remote Dhofar region of southern Arabia could send prices soaring in the temples of Jerusalem and Rome. A political dispute that closed a land route for silk could create a shortage so severe that Roman senators would complain about the drain on the imperial treasury. For the first time, events on one side of the world created tangible economic ripples on the other. The merchant networks became a single, sprawling nervous system, transmitting the impulses of supply and demand across continents. This was the birth of economic interdependence, a delicate web where the prosperity of a miner in Afghanistan was subtly tied to the funeral practices of an Egyptian pharaoh. The frantic bidding in a Babylonian marketplace for the latest shipment of spices was the direct ancestor of the flashing numbers on a modern stock ticker. These ancient traders, by dealing in objects of universal longing, had inadvertently built the prototype for our entire globalized economy, proving that the most powerful markets are built not on need but on shared human dreams. The constellations were a living map, a celestial guidebook written in the language of myth. For a Phoenician sailor on the midnight watch, the slow arc of the Great Bear across the northern sky was not just a collection of stars, it was a divine clock, marking the passage of the hours and confirming his ship's direction. The stories attached to these star patterns were not mere entertainment. They were the original memory palaces, vast mental structures designed to hold complex navigational data. The myth of Orion the hunter, forever pursuing the Pleiades sisters across the heavens, was a poetic way to remember the seasonal relationship between these two star clusters. When Orion began his ascent in the winter sky, it signaled the time for certain voyages, a calendar etched in light. These cosmic stories were paired with terrestrial myths that marked the edges of the known world. The Pillars of Hercules, the great rocks flanking the Strait of Gibraltar, were more than a geological feature. They were a psychological boundary, a mythic gateway beyond which lay the terrifying and unknown expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. To pass through them was to leave the ordered Mediterranean world behind and enter a realm of pure legend. Tales of sea monsters lurking in the deep were not just superstition, they were vital, coded warnings. A story about a many-headed beast that dragged ships to a watery grave might be describing a specific, treacherous whirlpool or a coastline of jagged, submerged rocks. The location of a blessed island, said to be the home of a benevolent nymph, could point sailors toward a rare source of fresh water or a safe, sandy cove for making repairs. This intricate fusion of practical observation and powerful narrative was the only way to conquer the sheer, overwhelming terror of the open ocean. It transformed a barren, trackless wilderness of water into a landscape rich with meaning and memory. The sky and the sea were no longer empty. They were filled with signs and stories, a sacred geography that gave the merchant adventurer the courage to sail beyond the horizon, trusting in the old tales to light his way home. A merchant from Cairo and a sailor from Genoa faced each other across a crate of spices, their words a tangled mess of Italian and Arabic, yet somehow a deal was struck. This daily miracle of communication was made possible by the world's first international languages, born not in royal courts but on chaotic docks. These were pidgin tongues, stripped-down linguistic tools forged from necessity. They blended the most essential words from multiple languages into a simple, functional vocabulary for trade. The most famous of these was the Mediterranean Lingua Franca, a mix of Italian, Spanish, Greek, and Arabic that became the common speech of sailors and merchants from the Levant to Gibraltar. Its grammar was brutally simple, its phrases direct and action-oriented. In this new language, there was no room for poetry or philosophy, only for the clear exchange of quantity, quality, and price. It was a verbal handshake, a code that prioritized mutual understanding over linguistic purity. This innovation dramatically lowered the barrier to entry for global commerce. A young merchant no longer needed years to master a foreign tongue. He just needed to learn the core phrases of the trade jargon. Misunderstandings that could lead to financial loss or even conflict were reduced, creating a more stable and predictable environment for everyone involved. The Lingua Franca did more than facilitate deals. It built a shared identity among those who used it, transforming strangers from distant lands into fellow participants in a global enterprise. But spoken agreements were fragile, easily forgotten or deliberately misremembered. This vulnerability pushed another, more permanent linguistic revolution. The need for reliable record-keeping pressed ancient administrations to adopt and spread standardized writing systems. The Aramaic script is a powerful example. Originally the language of a small Syrian people, its simple alphabetic system was so efficient that the vast Persian Empire adopted it as its official language for administration and trade. From the banks of the Nile to the Indus Valley, imperial scribes used Aramaic to record taxes, draft contracts, and track the movement of goods. A merchant in Babylon could now send a written order to a supplier in Egypt, confident that the message would be understood and honored. Writing froze a fleeting spoken promise into a lasting document, creating a foundation of accountability that spanned continents. Language itself had been weaponized for connection, evolving from a marker of tribal identity into a flexible tool for building a wider world. The very words they spoke and wrote were no longer just for telling old stories, but for writing a new, collective story of human interchange. The same trade routes that carried silk and spices also carried unseen, devastating passengers. As ships moved goods between continents, they inadvertently transported lethal illnesses, turning global networks into conduits for tragedy. The Justinian plague, which swept across the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, is a stark example. Believed to have originated in Central Asia, the sickness traveled along the bustling trade routes of the Mediterranean, hitching a ride on grain shipments and in the crowded quarters of merchant vessels. It reached the heart of the empire, Constantinople, with catastrophic effect, contributing to a period of profound hardship and reshaping the course of history. This was the dark paradox of connection. The same ships that brought prosperity could also deliver ruin, demonstrating that a network's greatest strength, its openness, was also its most profound vulnerability. Beyond the spread of illness, these pathways of exchange tragically enabled another form of commerce, the trade in human lives. From the ancient world through the medieval period, the institution of slavery was often interwoven with long-distance trade. Individuals could be captured through conflict and then transported vast distances along established merchant routes to be sold in foreign markets, far from their homes and cultures. This practice represented a profound perversion of the merchant's journey, turning the expansion of human horizons into a story of unimaginable loss and suffering for countless people. The legacy of these early merchants is therefore not a simple tale of progress. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brilliant cultural achievement and profound human cost. The very systems that allowed for the sharing of philosophy and art were the same systems that could spread devastation and enable immense cruelty. This duality is not a relic of the past, but a fundamental characteristic of our interconnected world. To understand the true impact of those first merchants is to acknowledge this full picture, a story of both luminous connection and deep shadow. reminding us that every bridge we build can carry both hope and hardship. A Roman senator's dinner table was a map of the world he would never see. The pepper dusting his food was harvested on the Malabar coast of India. The silk of his robes was woven from threads that began their life in a Chinese mulberry grove. The wine in his cup was aged in a jar sealed with beeswax from Greece. With every meal, every gesture, he was physically interacting with dozens of distant cultures, their labor and landscapes made tangible in his daily life. This constant sensory exposure to the foreign began to work a quiet revolution in the human mind. For the first time, an individual's identity was no longer forged solely within the walls of their native city or the traditions of their ancestral tribe. It was now being woven from threads gathered across continents. A person could feel a sense of connection to places they had never visited, simply because those places produced the objects that defined their existence. This was the birth of a new consciousness, a nascent cosmopolitanism where the horizon of one's concern and curiosity expanded to include the entire known world. The very idea of what it meant to belong was transforming. You were not just a citizen of Rome or a member of your clan, you were a participant in a vast, interconnected human network. This shift is powerfully illustrated by the spread of universalizing philosophies and religions. Stoicism, for instance, emerged in Greece but found its most passionate adherents in Rome. Its core it was the concept of a single, universal reason that bound all of humanity together into a common brotherhood. This philosophical framework provided an intellectual justification for the connected reality that merchants had already built. It suggested that the Persian artisan, the Egyptian farmer, and the Roman senator were all fundamentally equal, all citizens of a single world city. The incredible journey of Buddhism along the Silk Road offers another profound example. This deeply Indian philosophy of compassion was embraced, adapted, and made central to the cultures of Central Asia, China, and beyond. A monk translating a sutra in a Chinese monastery was, in that moment, both profoundly Chinese and a citizen of a wider spiritual world that transcended any single empire. This was not the loss of local identity, but its enrichment through a new, global layer of belonging. The most enduring legacy of those first merchants was not the wealth they accumulated, but this psychological seed they planted in humanity. They proved that our sense of self is not fixed, but can grow to encompass the world, that we can care about the fate of people we have never met because their story is, in some small way, woven into the fabric of our own lives.